Poor girl pays bus fare for a stranger, not knowing he is millionaire. What he did surprised everyone. Before watching the video, please leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm, street lights casting golden halos onto damp asphalt, distant horns echoing like faint memories, and strangers brushing past each other, too hurried to connect. Amid this noise and movement, Elliot Grant sat in the back of a sleek black car, his eyes fixed on nothing in particular. His tailored suit, slightly wrinkled from a long day, hung on his frame like armor. Outside, the skyline of his empire sparkled, but inside, his heart was a quiet storm of restlessness. The world knew him as the heir to the Grant Hospitality Group, a name etched onto the glass facades of luxury hotels across the country. But tonight, Elliot was just a man, tired, distracted, and completely unprepared for what was about to unfold. It only took one wrong turn. The GPS had lost signal momentarily, and before Elliot could react, his driver was forced to detour down a narrow street littered with broken glass and shadowy alleys. The next moments passed in a blur, a sudden stop, the glare of flashlights, harsh voices demanding everything he had. In less than 5 minutes, Elliot was standing alone in the middle of a deserted sidewalk, stripped of his wallet, phone, and pride. His luxury sedan was gone, swallowed into the night. The cold air bit at his skin as he stood motionless, disoriented, stunned by the violence of it all. He had never felt so human. With no phone to call his driver or car to hail a ride, he began walking, each step an echo of disbelief. His polished shoes slapped against the pavement, out of place in this corner of the city. He was a man used to being chauffeured, protected, buffered by layers of privilege. But now, under flickering streetlights and the weight of silence, he was just another lost soul trying to get home. A few blocks away, Clara Morales stood beneath the yellow glow of the bus stop sign. Her eyes were half-lidded from exhaustion, her back sore from hours on her feet. She had just finished her late shift at a small, worn-down diner where she served endless cups of coffee to customers who barely looked up. Clara was 24, but life had carved premature worry lines around her mouth and given her eyes the depth of someone twice her age. Her hands, calloused from dishwashing and lifting trays, gripped a few coins, the last of her tips, just enough to get home. Her coat was thin. The winter had come early this year. The bus hissed to a stop and Clara climbed aboard, dropping the coins into the fare box with a soft clink. She made her way to the back and pressed her forehead gently against the cold window. The hum of the engine lulled her eyes closed, but a voice at the front caught her attention. "I told you, no fare, no ride." Clara blinked, her gaze shifting forward. The bus driver stood firm, arms crossed, speaking to a man at the entrance. Tall, slightly disheveled, his once expensive clothes dirtied by the street. His hair, though neatly combed earlier, now looked tousled. He held no phone, no wallet. His eyes searched the driver's face desperately. "I was robbed. Everything's gone, my car, my phone, my wallet. I just need to get home." The driver scoffed, unconvinced. "Yeah, I've heard that before." Elliot swallowed hard. His voice was calm, but there was a tremble to it. "I swear I'm not trying to scam you. I just need a ride, please." The moment hung in the air like mist. Everyone watching, no one moving. Until Clara stood up. She didn't think twice. Maybe it was the weariness in his voice. Or maybe it was the haunted look in his eyes that mirrored her own too many times. Maybe it was the unspoken understanding that sometimes, when the world turns its back on you, a small act of kindness can keep a person from falling apart. "I'll pay for him," she said quietly. The bus grew silent. The driver blinked, surprised. "Are you sure?" She nodded and walked forward, pulling 2 extra coins from her pocket, the last of what she had. She handed them to the driver without ceremony. "He's with me." Elliot stared at her, speechless. Their eyes met, hers dark and steady, his wide with disbelief. She wasn't dressed in anything special, just a faded gray sweater, her diner apron still tied loosely around her waist. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, wisps falling around her tired face. But in that moment, to Elliot, she was extraordinary. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She gave him a faint smile. "Already did. Better get on before he changes his mind." Elliot stepped onto the bus, murmured a quiet thank you to the driver, and found a seat near the middle. He looked back at the girl who had just paid his way, stunned not just by her gesture, but by how little she seemed to think of it. She had no idea who he was. She didn't ask. She didn't hesitate. She just helped. And something about that shook him more than the robbery ever could. As the bus rolled forward, he glanced at her once more. She was back in her seat, head leaning against the window, already half asleep again. She didn't look at him. She wasn't expecting anything. For the first time in years, Elliot felt small and strangely grateful. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by people who only offered help when it benefited them. Deals, negotiations, obligations, it all came with strings. But here, on a city bus, a girl with nothing to spare had offered him something priceless: grace. He didn't even know her name, but somehow Elliot knew. He wouldn't forget her. Not ever. The bus rumbled on through the city's arteries, neon signs flickering across the windows like ghosts from another life. Elliot sat motionless, his hands resting on his knees, yet everything inside him was spiraling. He stared straight ahead, yet nothing registered. The streetlights passed like silent witnesses outside, but in his mind, he was still standing on that sidewalk, robbed, humiliated, alone, and then, out of nowhere, seen. Not by a business associate, not by a board member or an assistant waiting to clean up the mess. No, he had been seen by her. A stranger with tired eyes who smelled faintly of coffee and pastries, whose sweater sleeves were frayed, and whose shoes had long since lost their shine. A girl who had looked at him without judgment or calculation and reached into her own pocket to give him what little she had. Clara. He didn't know her name, but the image of her was etched into him like an engraving on his soul. In a world where people wore masks stitched from ambition, ego, and entitlement, this girl had shown him the rarest of all things, a kindness so pure, so untainted by agenda, that it left him breathless. The clink of her coins in the fare box echoed louder in his heart than any applause he'd ever received from a stage or a boardroom. In that simple gesture, in those few seconds of silent rescue, she had altered something inside him. He shifted in his seat, turning slightly to look back. She was still there, head gently resting against the window, eyes closed, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of someone who was used to carrying too much, yet still chose to give. She didn't know who he was. She hadn't recognized his face from magazine articles or hotel press releases. To her, he wasn't Elliot Grant, heir to a luxury empire, whose handshake could build towers and close billion-dollar deals. He was just a man without bus fare, stranded in the middle of the night, and still she had helped him. Would they? That question echoed in his mind like thunder in a canyon. He tried to recall the last time someone had done something for him without expecting something in return. A favor, a name drop, an invitation to a gala, a contract. He came from a world where everything was a transaction, every kindness a currency. But Clara, this soft-spoken girl in a diner apron, had broken that rhythm with a selflessness that felt almost ancient, almost sacred. And it made him feel ashamed. Ashamed of how often he had passed people like her without a second glance. How many bus stops had he driven past with tinted windows up, never wondering who might be standing in the cold? How many times had he dismissed someone's hardship as their own making, too absorbed in his own world of private jets, executive lounges, and five-star dinners? Now, without his usual armor of wealth and convenience, stripped down to nothing but the clothes on his back and the vulnerability of needing help, he realized how fragile the scaffolding of his identity really was. He turned again to glance at her. There was something magnetic in her stillness, a strength that didn't shout but whispered from every tired breath. She didn't just give him coins, she gave him dignity, and she did it with the quiet grace of someone who had probably learned to survive by offering light in dark places. His throat tightened unexpectedly. The bus jerked as it pulled up to the next stop. Clara stirred, standing slowly, gripping the handrail with weary hands. She looked toward the driver, preparing to get off. For a moment, panic surged inside Elliot. She was leaving. This stranger who had altered his night, and possibly something deeper, was about to walk away, back into the city's blur. He couldn't let her go without saying something. Anything. "Hey," he called out softly. She turned just slightly, her gaze meeting his. Thank you. You have no idea how much you helped me tonight. Her lips curved into a faint smile, so gentle, so unassuming. Everyone needs a little help sometimes, she said, then stepped off the bus and disappeared into the night. He sat frozen, unable to move. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she lived. He had no phone, no wallet, no way to track her down. And yet the pull he felt in his chest was undeniable, as if the universe had let them cross paths for a reason, only to immediately rip them apart again. The bus doors closed, and Elliot watched her walk away through the fogged window until she vanished into the folds of the city. But she didn't vanish from him. Not even close. That night, Elliot made it back to his penthouse in the heart of the city. The building, with its glass walls and polished marble floors, had never felt colder. The doorman, who barely looked him in the eye on regular days, raised his brows in surprise as Elliot entered, disheveled, without his usual entourage, without a car. "Mr. Grant, is everything all right?" Elliot forced a nod. "Just a bad night." Inside, he stood in the middle of his sleek, modern living room, surrounded by all the tokens of wealth he had accumulated. Artwork that cost more than most people's homes, imported rugs, minimalist furniture arranged by designers. And yet, for the first time, it all felt hollow, a collection of beautiful, expensive nothing. He sank into the couch, staring out at the city skyline. But his mind wasn't on skyscrapers or deadlines or stock portfolios. It was on her. On the way, she didn't hesitate, on the quiet strength in her voice, on the softness in her eyes when she said, "Everyone needs a little help sometimes." He replayed those words like a melody he couldn't stop humming. She didn't just leave an impression, she left a mark. Something had shifted in him, something small but undeniable. He had been living a life meticulously curated for optics and legacy, but one quiet act of kindness from a stranger on a bus made all of that seem irrelevant. Suddenly, the empire he was expected to inherit, the boardroom battles, the long tables with white cloths and silver cutlery, it all felt like noise, because now he needed to find her. Not out of gratitude, not to repay a debt, but because she represented something he hadn't known he was searching for, something real. He didn't even know her name, but her memory haunted him like perfume on an empty coat. The next morning came slowly with a sky painted in sleepy shades of blue and gold. Elliot barely slept. When he did, her face visited him, sometimes in dreams, sometimes just in flashes behind his closed eyelids. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The way her voice was steady, even after what must have been a brutally long shift. The simple dignity in her presence. He sat at the breakfast table, untouched food in front of him, as a thought took root in his mind. Quiet at first, then louder. Find her, it sounded crazy. She was just a girl, a stranger, a moment in the blur of an unplanned night. But no boardroom deal, no promotion, no new venture had ever gripped him like this one quiet connection had. He pressed the intercom. "James," he called to the doorman. "Yes, sir? I need a favor." "Of course." "Do you know which diner uniforms are blue near the downtown bus lines?" A pause, then, "I'll find out." Elliot stood by the window, heart racing like a boy with a schoolyard crush. But it was more than that. This wasn't infatuation. This was something deeper, older, like a recognition. Like his soul had finally bumped into someone who reminded it what it meant to be human. He didn't care how long it took. Didn't care how far he'd have to search. He had to see her again. He didn't want to let the moment pass him by like every other moment he'd overlooked in life, rushing from meeting to meeting, from city to city, always chasing success, never once pausing to feel something that truly mattered. Now he had, and he wouldn't, go back to the man he was before her. Dear listener, maybe you felt that too. Maybe somewhere in this course of your own life, between all the noise and the plans and the routines, someone showed you a moment of unexpected kindness. Someone saw you, and that one moment stayed with you longer than it should have. It reminded you of something you forgot you were looking for. That's what Clara did for Elliot. She didn't know the ripple she caused. Not yet. But Elliot was about to chase that ripple with everything he had. Because sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the smallest, quietest acts. A gesture on a cold bus, A hand offered to a stranger. A few coins passed forward. A kindness that echoed far beyond its moment. And this story, dear listener, it's far from over. Stay with me. Because the next chapter, when Elliot searches for the girl who unknowingly saved him, is where the real journey begins. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The city had already begun to wake when Elliot opened his eyes the next morning. Pale sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, illuminating every inch of modern perfection. Marble floors, clean lines, silent appliances humming in polished harmony. But he lay still beneath the weight of a sleepless night, staring at the ceiling with one name whispering in his mind over and over like a prayer he didn't know he'd memorized. He didn't even know her name, but he remembered everything else. The way her voice broke the silence on that bus, the coins in her palm, her last, he was sure, the warmth in her eyes, the way she disappeared into the night like a scene from a dream he wasn't ready to wake up from. And now she was gone. Elliot sat up slowly, a man no longer lost in his wealth, but suddenly lost in his own city. He had never cared for chaos before. His life ran on schedules, carefully placed suits, and morning press briefings. But that morning, chaos was exactly what he needed. He had to find her. He grabbed his coat, skipped breakfast, and descended the pristine elevator into the quiet lobby. "James," he said to the doorman, who glanced up from his newspaper. "Yes, Mr. Grant? I need your help." The older man straightened, his eyes alert. "Anything." "I need to find a diner," Elliot said, running a hand through his hair. "A small one, old, close to the downtown bus route. I don't know the name. But the waitresses wear blue khaki uniforms, short sleeves, white trim." James raised an eyebrow but said nothing. There was a pause, then, "I know a few. I'll make some calls." Elliot nodded, already heading toward the street. "Let me know as soon as you find anything." He stepped outside, the cold air biting his skin, and hailed a cab. For the first time in years, he didn't know where he was going, and yet, he was certain he was headed in the right direction. Across the city, in a quieter, forgotten neighborhood nestled between shuttered storefronts and laundry lines swaying in the morning breeze, Clara Morales stood behind the counter at Henry's Diner, pouring burnt coffee into chipped mugs. The air smelled of grease and toast, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like lazy bees. Her back ached, her feet screamed, but she smiled anyway. She always did. It was habit now, smiling through exhaustion, smiling through the ache of missing her father, smiling through the burden of watching her mother's hands tremble each morning from arthritis that robbed her of work and left Clara with the full weight of their rent. She had mastered the art of quiet suffering, of pretending everything was fine even when her soul begged for a break. But last night had been different. A man with haunted eyes, robbed of his world, looking so completely lost that something inside Clara had stirred. She hadn't thought twice. She simply reached for her coins and gave. She hadn't expected anything in return. She never did. "Clara," her manager's voice cut through her thoughts. "Table 4 is asking for extra syrup." She nodded and turned back to the griddle, her thoughts drifting again to the stranger. He looked so out of place, even without his wealth. There was something about him. His eyes, they held stories she wanted to hear. She shook the thought away. He was probably back in his world now, cleaned up, polished, surrounded by people with suits and titles. She was just a waitress in a fraying blue uniform. They lived in different worlds. And her world, well, it didn't often leave room for dreams. Elliot spent most of that day lost in parts of the city he'd only ever passed through with tinted windows. He walked into 3 different diners, asking polite questions, glancing at uniforms, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He was met with puzzled faces, cold coffee, and disappointment. He began to feel foolish. What was he doing? Searching for a stranger? For a girl who probably didn't even remember him? But he had to try. Something about her haunted him. Her kindness wasn't something he could just move on from. It had awakened something. That evening, James called. "I think I found it," the doorman said. "Small place, run down, waitresses in blue, just off 14th Street in Madison." Elliot didn't wait. He was already in his car before the call ended. The bell above the door of Henry's Diner jingled, And Clara didn't look up at first. She was wiping down the counter, lost in thought. But then she heard footsteps, hesitant, measured. And when she looked up, her breath caught in her throat. It was him, the man from the bus. But different now, clean-shaven, well-dressed, his coat tailored and his shoes shined. Still his eyes, they were the same. "You," she murmured. He stepped forward, smiling. "Hi. You found me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I had to," Elliot replied. "I couldn't stop thinking about you." She blinked, uncertain. "Why?" Elliot hesitated, glancing around the nearly empty diner before sitting at the counter. "Because last night, when the world turned its back on me, you didn't. And I needed you to know that meant something." Clara felt warmth rise in her chest, a lump forming in her throat she didn't expect. "It was nothing. I mean, you looked like you needed help." "It was everything," Elliot said, his voice thick. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything. You just helped, and no one does that anymore." She looked down at her hands, embarrassed. "I'm Elliot," he added quietly. "Clara," she said softly. They shared a silence, not uncomfortable, but full of something unspoken. Gratitude, curiosity, something deeper than either could name. "Can I buy you a coffee?" Elliot asked with a smile. She laughed. Shabbos. "I think I'm supposed to be serving you." "Just let me do this," he said gently. She nodded. That first cup of coffee turned into conversation. That conversation turned into routine. Each morning, Elliot came back, same stool, same smile, same warm gaze that held no trace of judgment. Clara found herself looking forward to it, even rushing to work just to see him walk through the door. She told him about her mother, about her late father who once dreamed of opening a bakery, about her dream to finish school and start a business in his memory. Elliot listened, truly listened, and for once, Clara didn't feel invisible. He, in turn, told her bits and pieces about his life, never revealing too much, always choosing humility over ego. He didn't want her to see him as the millionaire he was. He wanted her to see him, the man behind the name, the man who felt more human with her than anywhere else. But not everything was easy. One morning, Clara came in with red eyes. She'd stayed up all night fighting with her landlord over the leaking ceiling in their apartment. Elliot noticed instantly. "Are you okay?" She tried to lie, but couldn't. Some days are just harder. Elliot reached across the counter, gently touching her hand. "I wish I could take that weight off your shoulders." She smiled, bittersweet. "You already do. Just by showing up." That day, Elliot left a $100 tip and a note beneath his coffee cup. "In case you ever want to dream again." Clara cried when she found it. But the city wasn't done testing them. One afternoon, Clara's mother collapsed while cooking. Elliot was there within minutes, driving them both to the hospital and staying the entire night. He brought coffee. He held Clara's hand. He sat silently as doctors came and went. And that night, as she rested her head on his shoulder in the dim hospital waiting room, something shifted. Elliot wasn't just a kind man anymore. He was her person. The next morning, as they left the hospital in the early dawn light, Clara turned to him. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked softly. Elliot stopped walking. The sun framed his face in golden light. "Because I don't want to be anywhere else." And Clara, so used to people leaving, felt something break open in her heart. The sun had barely risen when Elliot stepped through the diner door again, the little bell above it chiming like a familiar melody. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon greeted him like an old friend. He scanned the small, well-worn space where the booths were faded and the wallpaper had peeled in the corners. But somehow it all felt grounding, safe, real. His eyes found her instantly. Clara Morales behind the counter, tying her apron with sleepy hands, her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail, face still carrying the softness of morning. And when she looked up and saw him, that quiet, tired smile reached her eyes. "You again," she teased gently, walking toward him with a pot of coffee in hand. "You're becoming part of the decor." Elliot laughed, easing into his usual stool at the end of the counter. "Maybe I just like the view." Clara rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide the way her cheeks warmed at the compliment. She poured his coffee, the steam rising like a whisper between them, and leaned on the counter. "Same order?" "Surprise me," he said, watching her with the kind of curiosity that couldn't be feigned. Clara nodded and moved away, and Elliot's gaze followed her. Not in the way a man watches someone he's attracted to, but in the way a soul watches something it wants to protect. He didn't know when it had started, this feeling of wanting to be near her, of needing to understand her, but it grew stronger with every passing day. She was different. She didn't ask him what car he drove or where he worked. She didn't care about luxury or brand names. She treated everyone the same, whether it was the grumpy old man who came in for eggs and complained about everything, or the exhausted mother with two screaming kids who just needed a hot cup of coffee and a moment of peace. She gave people what they needed most, dignity. And yet, Elliot hadn't told her the truth. Not yet. Each time he sat at that counter, sipping her coffee, listening to her stories, laughing at her sarcastic wit, his heart screamed to tell her who he really was. That he wasn't just another guy from downtown. That the hotel she passed on her way to work each morning, the one with the gold letters etched across the glass, was named after him. That he didn't just work in the hotel industry, as he had casually said on his first visit, he owned it, managed it, inherited it from a legacy he never asked for but carried anyway. But how could he tell her now? How could he look into those eyes, so free of judgment, so full of quiet hope, and risk seeing them change? What if she pulled away? What if everything that felt real suddenly wasn't? Meanwhile, Clara had noticed the way Elliot kept coming back, every morning like clockwork. She wasn't used to people staying, men especially. Her father had passed when she was a teenager, and every man since had taught her a different lesson in disappointment. Promises were cheap, and affection even cheaper. But Elliot? He didn't ask for anything. He didn't flirt carelessly or make her feel like she was an option. He listened. And when she talked about her dream of opening a bakery, just a small one with warm bread and good coffee and a window that let in the sun, he didn't laugh. He didn't ask how a girl like her planned to afford something like that. He just looked at her with those deep, gentle eyes and said, "I'd go there every day." And something in her cracked open. One morning during a rare lull, she found herself sitting across from him, a slice of lemon pie between them. He had insisted on buying it, and when she told him not to waste his money, he replied, "Supporting your dream isn't a waste." She stared at the pie for a long time before asking, "Do you ever feel like the world just isn't built for people like us?" Elliot tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Clara shrugged, her fingers fidgeting with her apron strings. "People who dream but don't have the means, who work two jobs and still can't save, who want more but keep getting less." Elliot was silent for a moment, then reached across the table, gently touching her wrist. "I think those are the people who build the most meaningful things." She blinked, unsure how to respond. No one had ever made her feel seen quite like that. But even as the days passed and their connection deepened, Elliot's silence about his true identity grew heavier. He told himself it wasn't a lie, just a delay, a small omission while he figured out if she was someone who could handle his world, or if he wanted to leave that world behind altogether. What he didn't know was that Clara had already started to suspect something. It was in the way he held his coffee cup, like someone trained in etiquette, the way he spoke about cities with ease, referenced places only the wealthy traveled to, and once, when she'd mentioned how she always wanted to visit the coast, he had said, "The view from the balcony suites is incredible," before quickly correcting himself. The suites, the view, it didn't add up, but she didn't press him, because for all his mystery, he showed up, and that meant more to her than whatever secrets he kept. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted. Then came the day she told him the full version of her dream. "I want to open my bakery near the ocean," Clara said softly. "A little place where people can sit, breathe, feel like life isn't rushing past them. My dad used to bake with me when I was a kid. It was the only time we were both quiet and happy." Elliot smiled, but there was a softness in his eyes, like her words had reached a part of him he rarely let others see. "You'll get there," he said. Clara scoffed. "Not on diner wages." "Don't say that," he replied. "You're closer than you think." She looked at him, uncertain. "You say that like you know something I don't." He smiled again, that same mysterious smile that told her he was still hiding something. But before she could ask more, a customer called her name, and she was pulled back into the rhythm of plates and coffee and orders shouted over sizzling pans. That night, as Elliot sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights glittering outside, he stared at his reflection in the window. He was falling for her, truly, and the weight of his silence threatened to destroy it all, because if he didn't tell her soon, the truth would break her trust, and that he couldn't bear. The city was buzzing like it always did, fast, loud, indifferent. But inside Henry's diner, everything was slow, soft, steady. That morning, Clara Morales stood behind the counter, gently humming to herself as she refilled the sugar jars. It was the kind of routine that comforted her. Her world didn't move in leaps and bounds. It moved in shifts and hours. Tables cleared, mugs stacked, tips collected $1 at a time. And in that space between orders and exhaustion, she found a strange kind of peace, especially lately, especially since he started showing up. Elliot Grant, the quiet man with deep eyes and a kind smile who had become part of her mornings, part of her days. She didn't know how it had happened exactly, it just had. One bus ride turned into coffee, coffee turned into conversation, and conversation turned into a connection that was deeper than anything she had expected, or maybe even deserved. He listened when she spoke. He remembered the small things. He asked about her mom. He laughed at her dry jokes. And in the warmth of his attention, Clara found herself softening, cracks in the wall she'd built beginning to let in light. But even in that light, shadows lingered. There were questions she hadn't asked, things that didn't quite make sense. The way he spoke about travel, the comfort he had in high-end cafes when they tried one together on her rare afternoon off. His posture, his words, his gestures, they carried the subtle ease of someone who had never needed. And yet, he had told her he worked in the hotel business. A simple man with simple needs. That's all he claimed to be. But deep down, Clara's instincts, sharpened by years of navigating hardship and false promises, kept whispering, he's holding something back. Still, she didn't push. Because the truth is, when you've been hurt, when you've been let down by people who were supposed to stay, you learn to take what joy you're given, even if you don't understand it. But truth doesn't stay buried forever. And sometimes, it comes crashing through your world when you least expect it. It was a rainy Tuesday. Clara was wiping down a booth near the window when her coworker, Diego, hollered from behind the counter. "Clara, you gotta see this." She glanced up, slightly annoyed, expecting some meme or local scandal. But Diego's face wasn't playful. It was shocked. He turned the small television on the wall up. It was the local news. A polished anchor with a practiced smile announced, in other business headlines, Elliot Grant, the elusive heir to the Grant hospitality empire, was seen last night attending the annual Investors Gala for Grant Properties. Grant, known for his low media presence, is expected to take over as acting CEO of the family's luxury hotel chain by the end of the quarter. The camera cut to footage of Elliot, her Elliot, walking through a crowd of journalists in a black tuxedo, surrounded by flashing cameras and suited executives. He looked calm, collected, like he belonged. Clara's body went still. That name, that face, that smile, heir, CEO, empire. It felt like the floor dropped out beneath her. Elliot wasn't just someone in the hotel business. He was the business. Everything he had said, every carefully vague answer, every detail he didn't share. She wasn't just confused, she was betrayed. She left the diner early that day. She didn't even bother to take off her apron. She walked through the rain, the streets a blur, her heart pounding in her ears. The city she had once found comfort in suddenly felt too big, too cold. How could he lie to me? She asked herself again and again. Why didn't he tell me who he was? What else has he hidden? By the time she reached the entrance of the Grand Hotel, its name now burning in her brain like a brand, her hands were shaking. The building loomed over her like a monument to the life she would never belong to. Gold letters, black marble, valets who didn't even glance her way. She walked in anyway. The receptionist glanced up in surprise. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Elliot Grant," she said firmly. The woman blinked. "Mr. Grant is in a meeting. Tell him Clara's here. He'll see me." The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone. Minutes passed, then the doors to the executive wing opened, and there he was, Elliot, still in that suit, still looking like the man she knew, and yet suddenly a stranger. Their eyes met across the lobby. His expression changed instantly. Shock, then regret, then something that almost looked like fear. He walked toward her, his steps slow and measured, but his face said everything. He knew this moment was coming. "Clara," he said, voice low. She crossed her arms. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked around, then gently guided her into a private corner near the elevators. "I wanted to. I just didn't know how." "You didn't know how?" Her voice trembled. "You let me believe you were just some guy who liked my coffee. And all this time you're, what, a millionaire? A CEO? "I never lied," he said softly. "But you didn't tell the truth either." He took a shaky breath. "I wanted you to know me, Clara. Not the name, not the money, just me." She looked away, fighting the sting in her eyes. "Do you know how humiliating it is to find out this way? On the news? In front of my coworkers? I wasn't trying to humiliate you. I've spent my whole life being treated like a transaction. Everyone wants something. But you," his voice broke slightly, "you just helped me. You saw me when I had nothing. And now that I know the truth," Clara said, "what am I supposed to do with it?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but please don't think any of this changes how I feel." She looked up at him then, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It changes everything, Elliot." That night, Clara sat on the porch of her small apartment, still in her uniform, her body soaked through from the rain. Her mother brought her a blanket and a cup of tea, watching her quietly. "Want to talk?" she asked. Clara shook her head, but then after a moment she whispered, "I thought I knew him. I really thought." Her voice cracked. Her mother placed a gentle hand over hers. "Maybe you do. Maybe you just learned something he was afraid to share. But how can I trust him now?" Her mother gave a small smile. "That's the thing about trust. It breaks. But sometimes it can be rebuilt, if it's real." Clara didn't answer, but her heart wanted to believe. The days after Clara walked out of the hotel lobby moved slowly, as if time itself had lost the rhythm it once danced to. She returned to work, poured coffee, wiped counters, and greeted customers with the same soft smile. But something had shifted, something inside her had gone quiet. Her laughter didn't rise as quickly. Her voice carried a weight it hadn't before. Because even though she tried to tuck it away, Elliot Grant lived in every corner of her mind. His voice, his smile, the way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world full of mirrors. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter, that he had lied, that his world, so polished, so privileged, would never be one she belonged to. And yet at night, when the lights were off and the city hummed quietly outside her window, she remembered every word he'd ever said, the way he told her he liked the diner because it felt honest, the way he listened when she talked about her father's bakery dreams, the way he never once treated her like she was beneath him. But still, he didn't tell me. That truth echoed like a wound. Meanwhile, across the city, in an office with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, Elliot Grant sat behind a desk he no longer recognized. The chair was the same, the view hadn't changed. But the man sitting there felt like a stranger. The emails he once read with purpose now blurred together. The voices in meetings, the praise, the negotiations, the projections, they all felt hollow because she was gone, and everything in him ached. He hadn't realized how much space Clara had taken up in his life until she wasn't in it. Mornings without her felt muted. Coffee without her laughter tasted bitter. He still went to the diner once, but the silence where she used to stand behind the counter was unbearable. She hadn't spoken to him since that day in the hotel, and he couldn't blame her. He had tried to protect something delicate, something real, by hiding the truth. But in doing so, he'd shattered the one thing he had been trying to build. And now, he didn't want to be here anymore. Not just in the office, not in this life. He stood up slowly and looked around the room. The degrees, the awards, the framed photo of his father shaking hands with city officials. All of it felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone who had never known Clara. He pulled out his phone, opened her contact, and stared at the screen. But no words came. What could he say? I'm sorry, didn't feel like enough. I miss you, felt too selfish. I love you. He wasn't sure she'd believe it now. Instead, he typed something simple. I need to find my own way. I hope one day you'll understand. He didn't hit send. He set the phone down, walked to the window, and pressed his forehead against the glass. The city was alive below him, people rushing, dreaming, surviving. And somewhere out there, Clara was living a day without him. That's when the decision came, not with panic, not with impulse, but with quiet certainty. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't be the heir, the image, the suit. He wanted to build something real. And if there was even a chance of earning back her trust, her heart, he had to start with truth. So he made the call. Dad, he said, his voice steady, I need to talk. The meeting was set for the following morning. The tension in the grand executive boardroom was thick enough to touch. Elliot sat across from his father, who wore his usual armor of tailored confidence and quiet control. You're leaving the company? His father repeated, as if he hadn't heard it the first time. Elliot nodded, yes. You do realize what you're giving up. I do. His father leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. Because of that girl? Elliot's jaw tightened. Because of me. Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. I built this for you, his father said. Everything you are is because of this company. Elliot looked up, eyes clear. No, everything I've been told to be is because of this company. But everything I found when I met her. The words were simple, honest, and they landed like thunder in the room. His father didn't speak, maybe because he didn't understand, or maybe because deep down he did. Either way, Elliot stood. I'm done pretending. He left the office that morning with no position, no paycheck, no title. But he had something far more valuable, freedom. Clara heard about it 2 days later. She was taking her break in the alley behind the diner when Diego rushed out with his phone in hand. Clara, you need to see this. It was a news headline, nothing flashy, just a photo of Elliot Grant stepping down from his family company. Elliot Grant resigns, announces intent to start small business venture. She stared at the screen, barely breathing. He had walked away from everything. Because of her? Because of something he found in her? She didn't know how to feel, but her heart, it stirred. It beat louder than it had in days. That evening, after her shift, Clara walked to the small cafe near the park where she and Elliot once sat and shared dreams over hot chocolate and pastry crumbs. He wasn't there, but she sat anyway. Ordered coffee, waited. Half an hour passed, and then the door opened. He stepped in, coat damp from the rain, hair slightly messy, eyes scanning the room. Their eyes met. For a moment, nothing else existed. He walked over slowly, unsure. Clara, he said, breathless. She stood, looked at him, and spoke the words that had lived in her chest since she'd read the headline. Why did you do it? He looked at her with a softness that made her chest ache. Because I couldn't be who I was anymore, he said. Not after you showed me what it meant to be real. Clara felt her throat tighten. I didn't do anything, she whispered. You did everything, he said. You saw me when I was invisible. You helped me without asking for anything. You made me want to be better. And if that means walking away from an empire, I'll do it 100 times over. She was quiet for a long moment. Then finally, are you really gone from that world? He nodded. I left the boardroom, the corner office, the name. And now? I want to build something from the ground up. Something honest. Something small. Something ours, if you'll let it be. Her eyes searched his. What about the bakery? She asked. He smiled. Still think it belongs by the ocean. Clara laughed softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. She stepped forward, closed the distance, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel uncertain. She felt home. If you've ever been torn between who the world expects you to be and who you really are, if you've ever walked away from something big to protect something true, if you've ever risked your comfort for love, for peace, for purpose, then you know what Elliot just did. He chose heart over legacy. He chose truth over image. He chose Clara. So right now in the comments, drop a message that says, I'm proud of Elliot. Or share a time when you made a brave choice to walk away from what was expected of you. Because these are the moments that change everything. The turning points, the quiet, messy, brave decisions that lead us toward who we're meant to be. And for Clara and Elliot, this is just the beginning. Stay with me, friend, because the next chapter, it's called A New Beginning, and it's the dream they never thought they'd be able to chase. But now they'll chase it together. Would you like me to continue with Idea 7, building a new life together in the same immersive tone? It started with a drive down the coast. The air smelled different there, saltier, cleaner, lighter. The city's sirens were replaced by the hush of waves lapping against the shore and the occasional distant call of a gull overhead. And as Elliot slowed the car, pulling off the road onto a narrow gravel path that led toward the sea, Clara leaned forward from the passenger seat, her dark eyes wide with quiet wonder. The land before them was walled and beautiful, untouched by glass towers or neon signs. A large plot sat near the edge of the water, crowned by the remnants of an old, weather-worn structure that had once been a seaside inn. Now, only its bones remained, stone walls softened by sea breeze and time, windows boarded, yet still somehow full of stories. The sun was dipping low, casting a golden haze across the ocean. It painted the world in amber and hope. "This is it," Elliot said softly. Clara blinked. "You want to build here?" "No," he replied, looking at her with a spark in his voice that hadn't been there in weeks. "I want us to build here." She turned her gaze back toward the sea, letting the words settle around her like mist. "A hotel and my bakery?" He nodded. "One place, one dream. Shared, real, just ours." She was silent for a long time, but in her heart something opened, like a window she had kept locked for too long. In this place she could see it, the laughter of guests echoing from balconies, the scent of bread and cinnamon rolling out through open doors, her mother sitting by the window with a cup of tea, the quiet buzz of something she'd only ever imagined. Peace, Watu. And that night, as they stood together on the hill watching the stars come alive above the water, she whispered her answer with a trembling smile. "Yes." From that moment on, everything changed. Their days were filled with blueprints, early morning site visits, and long drives along coastal roads with coffee cups in hand and dreams spilling between them like sunrise light. Clara, who had once spent her days counting coins to make ends meet, now found herself flipping through swatches of color, bakery layout sketches, and recipe drafts. And Elliot, who had walked away from a billion-dollar empire, now found deeper satisfaction in measuring window frames and sampling local jam than he ever had at a corporate gala. They were building something from nothing, and yet somehow it felt like everything. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks, of course, contractors who pushed deadlines, unexpected costs, a shipment of tiles that arrived broken, and once, a week of rain so relentless, it turned the construction site into a shallow pond. But each time something went wrong, they looked at each other, not with frustration, but with resolve. With hands held tightly, they said what they'd learned to say over and over: "We'll figure it out, together." There were days when Clara doubted herself. "I've never run a business," she'd say, staring at a spreadsheet, her fingers tracing the edge of a calculator she didn't know how to use. "You've run your whole life," Elliot would reply gently, with heart, grit, and grace. "That's more than most CEOs can say." She'd smile, not because the numbers made sense yet, but because she believed him. And there were nights when Elliot felt the weight of everything he'd walked away from pressing in. "What if we fail?" he'd whisper once, lying beside her on a mattress on the floor of their rented cottage. Clara would shift closer, rest her hand over his chest. "Then we fail, but we do it knowing we tried. And that's a life I'd still be proud of." They named it the Driftwood Inn, a nod to things that survived the waves. Clara's bakery, nestled in the heart of the ground floor, would be called La Vida Dulce, the sweet life. She wrote it on a napkin one day, nervously tracing the letters like a child practicing her name. "This," she said, "is for my dad." Elliot kissed her temple and whispered, "And for you." Together they crafted every detail with their own hands. They chose soft linens for the rooms, local wood for the doors, handmade mugs for the cafe. Nothing was mass-produced. Nothing was rushed. It took longer than expected. It cost more than they planned. But it was theirs. They painted walls while music played through a speaker on the floor. Elliot danced with her once while waiting for the paint to dry, spinning her through empty halls with laughter that echoed off fresh plaster. They taste-tested cakes until they both swore they couldn't handle another bite, then always took one more. They planted lavender near the windows and lemon trees by the patio. They built community with every handshake, and stories shared with locals who had watched the inn decay for years and now marveled at its resurrection. Clara's mother visited often, her smile growing with each trip. Once a woman who had only ever known hardship, she now sat at a sunlit cafe table with a book and a pastry, her eyes glistening. "You did this," she told Clara one morning. "You made your father's dream your own. He'd be so proud." And for the first time, Clara let herself cry, not out of grief, but gratitude. And you, listening now, maybe you've been where they were. Maybe you've had a dream that seemed too far, too big, too impossible. Maybe you've stood at the edge of something terrifying and chosen to leap anyway. Maybe you've walked away from a life that made sense on paper to build one that made sense in your heart. If so, you understand what Clara and Elliot were building. This wasn't just a hotel. This was healing, nailed and plastered and stitched into walls. This was hope, kneaded into bread and poured into mugs. This was love, made visible. So if you've ever dared to dream of something different, even when it scared you, leave a comment right now that says, "I believe in new beginnings." Let Clara know she's not alone. Let yourself know it too. Because what they were doing, it was rare. It was brave. It was real. Opening day came quietly. No fanfare. Just the sun rising golden over the water, seagulls sweeping across the sky, and the doors opening with a soft creak that smelled like paint, fresh bread, and the beginning of forever. Clara stood behind the bakery counter in her apron, her heart pounding beneath her chest. Elliot walked the front lobby, straightening pillows that didn't need fixing, adjusting frames by fractions of an inch. They were both nervous, terrified even. "What if no one comes?" she asked. He took her hand. "Then we'll sit on the patio, drink our own coffee, and enjoy the ocean." But people came, not in droves, not like a parade. They came in pairs and quiet steps. An elderly couple who had honeymooned at the old inn decades ago, a young writer looking for solitude, a woman with a dom and a camera who said she had passed the place for years, always wondering what it could be. They tasted Clara's pastries, complimented the lemon pie, lingered in the sunlit lounge with books and board games. They asked Elliot about the rooms, about the view, about whether the fireplace was real. And when evening came and the last guest went to their room, Elliot found Clara standing by the big window, looking out at the sea. "You okay?" he asked. She turned to him, eyes full. "I'm happy," she said. Scared, but happy. He stepped closer, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I think we did it," he whispered. She smiled. "No, we're just getting started." And with the stars blinking awake above the water, they kissed, soft, slow, full of everything that had carried them here. They say building something from the ground up tests your patience, your limits, and your heart. But what no one ever tells you is how much it can test your faith, not just in the dream itself, but in the person standing beside you when everything starts to shake. Clara and Elliot had opened the Driftwood Inn in La Vida Dulce with the kind of joy that doesn't shout. It hums. It hums in the way you exhale slowly at the end of the day, in the quiet nod of a first-time guest who returns for the second morning's coffee, in the small miracles, a perfect croissant, a sunny weekend, fully booked, a little girl telling Clara, "This is the best pie I've ever had." But after the ribbon was cut, after the warm opening, real life returned with its hands full. And it didn't knock gently. It started with a soft thud, a crack in one of the foundation beams. A harmless seeming issue, the contractor said, common in older restorations. But then came the report. The moisture levels in the lower walls were unstable. The plumbing needed reinforcement. Several exterior panels hadn't been properly sealed, allowing rainwater to settle where it shouldn't. At first, Elliot kept the worry to himself. He read through the technical documents late at night, his face lit only by his laptop. Clara would wake to the sound of rain outside and glance over to find him still awake, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He'd smile and say, just wrapping up, but she saw through him. Then came the cost estimates. The repairs would total nearly double what they had budgeted for contingencies. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was enough to pause their plans to expand the bakery's patio, to delay new furniture orders, to put off the website's booking feature they had been dreaming of. When Elliot finally told Clara, she didn't panic, she didn't cry. She simply said, "Then we wait." And in that moment, Elliot realized something. The foundation they had built between themselves was stronger than any beam in that inn. Still, it wasn't easy. They spent their mornings smiling for guests, hosting events, baking until Clara's hands ached. And they spent their nights quietly counting receipts, holding each other in bed while their thoughts spun louder than the waves outside. Clara scaled back her bakery hours to cut labor costs. She took on more herself. It was the same rhythm she'd known here her whole life, working more to save more. But this time it hurt more, because this dream was hers. Because now she wasn't just surviving, she was protecting something. One morning, after the breakfast rush, she sat on a stool in the kitchen and buried her face in her hands. Elliot found her there, flowers still on her arms, her hair coming loose, the scent of cinnamon and butter lingering like a second skin. He knelt in front of her, brushing a finger under her chin. "We'll get through this," he said. She looked up, eyes red. "I just want to do this right." "You already are," he whispered. They held each other for a long time, but storms don't always come in the form of finances or leaking pipes. Sometimes they come from the button, knocking on your door with a smile you'd hoped to forget. It happened on a Thursday. The inn was quiet. Clara was behind the counter, restocking napkins and humming a tune her father used to whistle. She didn't see him at first, not until she heard that voice, low and lazy. "Still working hard, I see." She turned sharply, the breath catching in her throat. Eric, her ex-boyfriend, the man who once told her her bakery dream was cute, but unrealistic. The man who had vanished the moment her mother got sick. The man who had only ever seen her as someone to fix his loneliness, not someone worth building with. He stood by the front door, his hands in his coat pockets, that same smirk on his lips. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked, her voice flat. "I was driving through town," he shrugged. "Heard about this little place. Saw your name on a flyer, thought I'd drop in." Clara's hands gripped the edge of the counter. "Well, you've dropped in, now you can leave." Eric raised his eyebrows. "Come on, Clara, I'm just being friendly. Thought maybe you'd want to catch up." Before she could respond, Elliot stepped out from the hallway, his eyes immediately locking onto Eric. He didn't need an introduction. The tension in Clara's shoulders said everything. "Is there a problem?" Elliot asked calmly, stepping beside her. Eric gave him a slow once-over. "So this is the new guy, huh?" Clara stepped forward. "You should go." But Eric smirked. "Just wanted to say hi. You've come a long way, Clara. Never thought you'd actually make it happen." The words weren't a compliment. They were sharp, backhanded, and she knew it. "Goodbye, Eric," she said. He lingered for a moment, as if daring Elliot to speak, but Elliot only stared, silent and steady. And eventually, Eric left. The bell over the door chimed behind him. Clara didn't move for a full minute. She just stared at the spot where Eric had stood, breathing shallowly. Then she felt Elliot's hand on her back, warm and grounding. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "You don't have to apologize. I didn't expect to see him again." Elliot turned her to face him. "You don't owe me explanations, but I want you to know this. Whatever he made you feel, whatever words he used to shrink your dream, they don't live here anymore." Tears welled in her eyes. He kissed her forehead. "You're not alone, Clara. Not now, not ever again." And to you, listening right now, maybe you've had someone from your past show up and try to rattle the peace you fought hard to build. Maybe you've faced days where the dream felt fragile, where the numbers didn't add up, and the fear sat on your chest like a weight. Maybe you've stared down your doubts and said, "I'm doing this anyway." If that's you, leave a comment right now that says, "Keep going, Clara." Because people like Clara, people who show up, even when it's hard, who choose growth, who choose love, who keep baking the pie even when the oven's broken, they're the ones who make the world warmer. And maybe, like Clara, you need to hear this too. You're doing better than you think. Even when the floors creak, even when the bills come in, Even when someone from your past shows up and tries to make you doubt who you are, you're still here. And that's strength. Later that night, when the inn had gone quiet and the lights were dimmed, Clara sat beside Elliot on the porch overlooking the sea. The waves were gentle tonight, like they knew the world had been heavy and were offering calm. Clara sipped tea from her favorite cup, a chipped blue mug Elliot had bought for her on one of their early supply trips. She leaned into him. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked. Elliot wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "We already are." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I'm scared sometimes." "Me too," he said. "But scared doesn't mean weak. It means you care." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the ocean. Then Clara said something she'd never said out loud before. "I used to think people like me weren't meant for more, that dreams were for other people." Elliot turned to her, his voice thick with emotion. "People like you are exactly who dreams are for." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she believed him. It didn't happen all at once. The success, the peace, the quiet understanding that they had made it, not just through the opening of a hotel or the launch of a bakery, but through each other's walls, fears, and failures. It unfolded slowly, like dough rising under the warmth of patience, like the tide pulling gently at the edges of the shore. One day, Clara woke up before sunrise to start baking and paused to look around. The kitchen humming with soft light, her apron draped neatly on the hook, the scent of flour and vanilla already whispering through the room. And she realized without fanfare or thunder, she was happy. Not the fleeting, fragile kind, but the kind that grows from roots. The Driftwood Inn became more than a business. It became a rhythm, a heartbeat in the little coastal town. Locals wandered in not just for coffee or a bed, but for community. The man who once asked for directions stayed a week and left a thank you note saying, "Your pie reminded me of my mother's. She passed years ago. I thought I'd forgotten her." A young couple celebrated their anniversary in the Ocean View Suite, returning a year later with a baby in their arms. A retired teacher from up north came every month just to sit by the window, sip Clara's cinnamon tea, and write letters to her grandchildren. And Clara, who once doubted the worth of her dreams, found herself at the center of something far greater than a bakery. She was creating memory, meaning, magic. Elliot, too, changed. His steps grew lighter. He laughed more, not the polite train laugh he once used in boardrooms, but the kind that curled naturally from his chest when Clara smudged flour on his nose, or when a guest told a joke so bad he had to groan. He found fulfillment in the quiet victories, installing a bookshelf in the lounge with his own hands, teaching Clara to drive stick shift down a quiet country road, learning how to fold sheets so well the cleaning staff joked he should open a linen school. They lived simply, but fully. And in that simplicity, their love deepened. It wasn't all roses. There were still late nights filled with paperwork, days when the power flickered unexpectedly, mornings when the croissants didn't rise right, or the pipes froze, or Clara accidentally burned a batch of scones and stormed out the back door in tears. But Elliot always found her. He'd step outside, still in his apron, and wrap his arms around her from behind. "We're doing okay," he'd whisper. "One burnt scone doesn't undo everything we've built." And she'd lean back into him and whisper, "I know, I just wanted it to be perfect." And he'd say the thing he always said, the thing that settled her soul every single time. "It already is, because it's ours." One afternoon, Clara's mother sat in the cafe, watching them from her usual seat. She stirred her tea, watching the way Clara passed a plate to a guest with a smile, the way Elliot leaned over to kiss her temple as he walked by. Her eyes softened, misting slightly. "You look like you've known each other forever," she said later as Clara refilled her cup. Clara smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Sometimes it feels that way." Her mother reached over, squeezing her hand gently. "He sees you," she said quietly. "Really sees you. Your father would have liked him." Clara's heart ached gently at those words, not with pain, but with a kind of healing. She nodded. "I think he would have too." And then came that moment, not dramatic, not planned, but breathtaking in its simplicity. They were closing up for the night, the last guests tucked into their rooms, the stars spilling over the dark sky like confetti. Clara wiped down the bakery counter while Elliot restocked firewood by the front hearth. Music played softly in the background, one of her favorite old love songs, the kind her parents used to dance to in their kitchen. As the final note drifted into the quiet, Elliot walked over slowly, wiping his hands on a towel. "Clara," he said gently, "come outside with me." She looked up, curious. "Now?" He nodded, eyes soft. "Just for a minute." She followed him out onto the patio. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, the moon casting a silver path across the water. The wind tugged gently at her sweater. "Close your eyes," he said. She raised an eyebrow but obeyed. She heard the soft crunch of his shoes stepping away, then back toward her. Then silence. Then, "Okay," he whispered. She opened her eyes. Elliot was kneeling, right there on the wooden patio they had built together, in the home they had built together, holding a small velvet box in trembling hands. And the look in his eyes, my God, it held everything. "Clara," he began, voice uneven, "you changed my life in a way I didn't know was possible. You showed me what real love looks like, not perfect, not easy, but honest and brave and rooted. I used to think my life was mapped out, but you gave me a reason to start drawing it all over again." He opened the box slowly. "I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to grow old in this place with your laughter filling these rooms. I want to bake bread with you and argue over which jam is best and kiss you when the oven timer dings." She let out a teary laugh. "I want to live this life with you, Clara Morales, forever. Will you marry me?" Clara's hand flew to her mouth. She nodded before she could even find words, tears falling freely now. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." Elliot stood, slipping the ring onto her trembling finger. A simple, elegant diamond surrounded by delicate detailing, just like her. And then he kissed her under the moonlight, with the waves clapping gently below and the wind wrapping around them like a blessing. They told her mother that night, told the staff the next morning, and the entire town the day after that. Not through a formal announcement, but through smiles and whispers and the gentle glow in their eyes. The wedding was held 3 months later, on the beach beneath a canopy of linen and driftwood, with chairs arranged in the sand and strings of lights swaying above their guests like fireflies. Clara wore a flowing dress of soft lace, her hair down in waves, a small flower tucked behind her ear. Elliot stood at the altar barefoot, hands clasped in front of him, eyes never leaving hers. The ceremony was short, but the vows, they were full. Clara's voice shook, but she spoke from a place so deep it echoed across the waves. "I've spent so much of my life believing dreams were for other people, that someone like me was meant to serve others' happiness, not have my own. But you saw me, and every day since you've reminded me I am allowed to love, to grow, to dream. With you, I am not just enough. I am whole." And Elliot, tears in his eyes, replied, "You once gave me a bus fare, but you didn't just pay my way home. You led me here, to the life I never knew I needed. You taught me that love isn't a prize, it's a promise, one I'll keep every day for the rest of my life." They kissed, the waves clapped it again, and for a moment, it felt like even the sky held its breath. The days after the wedding were quieter, softer, but not in the way that things fade. Oh, no. This was the kind of quiet that settles in after a storm has passed. The kind of quiet that means you've made it through. Clara Morales and Elliot Grant woke up that first morning, not to applause, not to champagne toasts or distant cameras, but to the sound of gulls outside their bedroom window and the smell of sea air brushing through the open screen. Clara stirred beside him, her fingers tangled in the linen sheets, her face lit by the soft gold of a new day. Elliot didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He just reached over, pressed his lips gently to her forehead, and breathed her in like a prayer answered. It had been a long journey, one paved with questions and sacrifice, with quiet acts of courage and small daily miracles. Clara, who once counted her coins to ride a bus, now ran her own bakery, with her name painted on the window in looping letters and the smell of warm bread inviting strangers into her dream. Elliot, who once believed his life was scripted for boardrooms and shareholder meetings, now greeted guests at a place he built with his own hands, a place where no one cared about his last name, only the warmth in his smile. Together they had built something that was more than a business. It was a home, not just for them, but for anyone who walked through their doors needing rest or comfort or a reminder that good people still exist in the world. The Driftwood Inn became known not for luxury, but for love, for the way Clara remembered every returning guest's favorite pastry, for how Elliot personally carried luggage when the weather was bad, always asking how the drive had been, for the photographs hung in the lounge, snapshots of families laughing, elderly couples celebrating anniversaries, children in pajamas sipping cocoa by the fire. These weren't stock images or advertisements. These were memories. And that's what they had been building all along. Not wealth, but legacy. A different kind of wealth, one measured in trust, in late-night talks under the stars, in the bravery it takes to love someone deeply even after life has broken your heart. They didn't need perfect days. They just needed each other. Of course, the world outside didn't slow down. The economy rose and fell. New businesses came to town. Sometimes guests canceled last minute. Sometimes ingredients didn't arrive. Once the power went out during peak season, and Clara had to bake using a tiny backup generator and 2 borrowed lamps from a neighbor. But even in those moments, especially in those moments, they chose grace. When Clara grew tired, Elliot stepped in. When Elliot became discouraged, Clara reminded him how far they'd come. Their love wasn't always romantic. It wasn't always tidy. But it was honest, shaped by every challenge they met hand in hand, by every night they stayed up talking through fears instead of letting silence win. Love like that isn't lightning, it's light. The kind that never burns out. The kind that stays. One evening, a young woman arrived at the inn. She looked nervous, like she didn't quite belong. Clara greeted her with her usual warmth, asked her if she wanted tea. The woman smiled shyly. "I heard about this place from someone who stayed here last month. Said it was built by people who used to be lost and found themselves." Clara's heart caught in her chest. "Well," she said, "you heard right." The woman's voice shook. "I just left a job I hated. I don't know what's next. I just needed somewhere quiet to breathe." Clara guided her to a window seat. "You're in the right place." Later that night, she told Elliot about the girl. He nodded, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "You know," he said softly, "we used to be that girl." Clara smiled. "And now we're the ones with the open door." To you, listening right now, you've walked beside them through every chapter. You saw Clara when she was just a girl with tired feet and calloused hands, giving her last coins to a stranger on a bus. You saw Elliot, stripped of everything he thought made him powerful, learning that true strength lives in vulnerability. You were there when they doubted, when they broke, when they chose to rebuild. Not just a place, but a life. And maybe, just maybe, you saw a piece of yourself into them. Because maybe you too have felt the weight of starting over. Maybe you've wondered if your dream matters, if your kindness counts, if you'll ever be seen, really seen, by someone who chooses you not for what you have, but for who you are. Let this story remind you of something simple, something deep. Good people still find each other. Kindness matters more than status. Dreams take time, and that's okay. And most importantly, love, real love, grows not in grand gestures, but in small, quiet choices made every day. So if you've been moved by Clara and Elliot's journey, leave a comment right now that says, "Thank you, Clara and Elliot." Let's flood the comments with gratitude, not just for the characters, but for what they represent. And if you've made it this far, if your heart has walked with them, if your soul needed this story, tap that like button to help share it with others who might need it too. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Because there are more waiting, stories of love, redemption, courage, and hope, all told just like this, with heart. And if you know someone who needs this reminder, someone who's struggling to believe their story can still turn around, send them this video, because this is more than fiction. This is faith. The final scene, it's not grand. It's just real. Clara stands outside the bakery, wiping down one of the little cafe tables as the sun begins to set over the sea. The sky is streaked with soft pinks and purples. Elliot walks up behind her, holding 2 steaming mugs. She smiles without turning. "Chamomile?" she guesses. "Ginger honey," he says. "I figured we both need a little peace tonight." She sets down her cloth and accepts the cup. They sit in silence, watching the sky, listening to the waves. No words are needed, because sometimes the happiest endings don't come with fireworks. They come with quiet mornings, with second chances, with someone beside you who chose to stay. And maybe that's what we're all searching for. Not a perfect life, but a love that meets us where we are and says, I see you, I choose you. Let's begin again, Baraga, together. Thank you for listening, and until the next story, keep believing in the power of small kindnesses, quiet beginnings, in the kind of love that doesn't need to shout to be real.